I'd like to talk to you about what you have because this is, in many ways, in my view at least, a checklist of the things that everyone here should hold themselves accountable to as it relates to your own ability to actually build sustainable organizations and your own leadership capability in those who you surround yourself with, and to consider the implications of not doing these things well when you look at it in totality. So having grown companies, having outsourced businesses, having closed businesses, dealing with today a 120-year-old historic institution and operating in the 21st century in a digital environment, there are some things that are consistent across all of those experiences, particularly through the leadership lens. And these four areas, which I call conscious, connected, informed, and influential leadership, are what I have observed or have experienced along the way, which really speak to the essence of what's important. Now, when I talk to, let's say, graduating college students or people in the general business community, the one thing I always say to them is, the one thing that you don't want to do is become an avid business book reader. Not that it's a bad thing, but that all of this and your success against these four areas is very much about context. The more you are constantly aware of what's going on in the world around you from so many different contextual point of view is what matters more in your role as an executive leader than just reading the latest business book on whatever the topic is of the day, because that is really not answering anything. And this, to me, represents touch points around many different people, many different experiences, both here and abroad, that have felt kind of tie all together. And so what I'd like to do is just take a minute to walk you through these four areas and ask you some questions and vice versa, so to make sure and you understand what this is all about. So first of all is conscious leadership on the upper left-hand corner, right? What are the four things that play heavily into conscious leadership? Self-awareness. I think everyone that doesn't need explanation, but I guess ask yourself the question, when was the last time you asked someone for feedback about you and you actually owned it? And you did something with it, and they were encouraged to do the same thing. Emotional intelligence, essentially, kind of back to the point that you were saying about how do I handle situations in the workplace in terms of not recognizing versus criticizing. To what degree do you understand the impact of your emotion and behavior in the workplace? I worked with a CEO who was incredibly emotional, who was incredibly divisive, yet on a one-on-one basis was a wonderful human being, but could not make the connection between the two. And as a result, suffered, and the business suffered as a result from it. Do you look at yourself and you're saying, I'm an agile leader, just based upon this definition? Do you think you're agile? Anybody here, would you call yourself agile? Sensing and responding to change and adapting the right decision-making process towards achieving the best results. Do you have the ability to weave in and out and deal with the situation at hand, make the right decisions, and adapt? I've got to believe in an environment of a startup, you better be able to do so. But the reality is, even in my environment right now, the same applies. It doesn't matter. The difference is your time frame is a lot shorter than mine right now. And then lastly, being values-driven. The key word here is your actions as opposed to your words. This goes back to the authenticity of the notion of the environment that you're leading and the culture that you're trying to create. For the most part, if you can't live up to the words that you're talking about, it goes back to, well, then you're not a great place to work. I mean, people are going to see right through it, and that's where the great Glassdoor review process comes into play, amongst other examples. So the extent to which you are a conscious leader is 1/4 of what's the possibility for yourself. The next one is your ability to be a connected leader. Relationship building. I cannot, well, I can, but for you to create a deep connection with the people that are working for you or that you surround yourself with is really important. Oftentimes in more kind of enlightened work environments, Those who can bring their whole self to the workplace, not the Steve Schloss work version, but the whole Steve Schloss version, get a lot more out of Steve. And allowing that to happen. And it doesn't mean you're creating chaos, because everyone is different and they bring unique things to the table. To what degree does the environment allow that to happen in the first place? And to what degree are you preventing it from happening based upon what people think you want versus you getting the most out of them? I think it's easy to say that your ability to use the right tools to get the right messages out in today's world is kind of an assumption, but not everybody does it well. And not every tool works for the right situation. And knowing your environment and your culture to plug it in makes significant impact. And the irony is the best tool of all when it comes to communicating is the communication between two people in the same room at the same time. I don't care what tool you have, I don't care where you are, that is the best tool of all. And if you are someone who leads through technology, recognize there's value to that, but it doesn't get you to where you need to be. Even if you have a remote organization, the extent to which you're getting people together is so crucial. The notion of being inclusive, and to me, there's the diversity element in terms of thought, idea, gender, ethnicity, background, it doesn't matter. But more importantly for this conversation is, to what degree are you engaging others in decision-making or in discussion that are not necessarily the ones you think should be in the room, but there are others who bring information to the table that you might want to invite because their ideas might be unique enough that they're going to add value that you otherwise might not have thought of in the first place. And are you willing to be more inclusive in that sense? And then lastly is the notion of positive disruption, which is really, to what degree are you enabling significant debate and really serious disagreement, but with a positive benefit, as opposed to you're just a tough person to work with and the environment to work with you always results in disagreement, but it's not a positive outcome. And by the way, this is fundamental stuff, okay? There's nothing here that is breakthrough, but it is hard to do, okay? And it's important to recognize that the more you do this fundamental stuff well, you will significantly improve your leadership capabilities and those around you. And if you're looking at ways to grow your own leaders in the organization, this is one way to look at it and saying, you know, what are the elements that matter to us? On informed leadership, you know, I go back to context for the moment, but knowing the environment you're in matters enormously. One of the things I tell people when I'm coaching them is, what's the context of the situation that you're in, and how does that inform you in the decision you need to make? And that also goes to the second one about organizational designation. Where are you in the curve? Are you in a startup? Are you in a turnaround? Are you in a for-profit or a pre-IPO or a nonprofit? And how do those things intersect and lead to your ability to make the right decision, the informed decision, to be an informed leader? I'd like to believe that everyone here is forward-thinking because you've started something and you're bringing something to the market, and you want to be a person who is known as forward-thinking, and thus those around you are forward-thinking. But the extent to which you share it and you leverage it and you enable it to be applied is essential. And oftentimes what I see is that the knowledge that a person has, the person who is leading a company that people look up to, barely gives the organization the things that they need, because everything is up in the head as opposed to communicated out. And for some people, it's very hard to kind of cogently turn that into opportunity. So when you're in front of your teams, whether it's a team of 5 or 500, how do you use every one of those opportunities to share and teach, to inspire in a way that people know that you're always thinking ahead, and that inspires them enough to keep doing what they're doing every day, which might be 2 years behind where you are right now. And ultimately, that leads to the fourth one, which is curiosity. To what degree do you have an environment where you're enabling curiosity? We used to say at LivePerson there were three things that we look for in people. One, that they're intellectually curious. Two, that they know how to connect effectively on a global basis. And three is they know how to get shit done. And those were the three things. And we cared about that a lot. And it was the kind of thing where in scaling the company, we looked at very seriously, because the distance between you and what you need to get done really is yourself. And how do you go about getting something done knowing that there are a few people around you to do so? And how do you leverage the community of knowledge that's in the organization? And then lastly, which in many ways is the hardest thing you have to do, is what I call influential leadership, which is going back to the difference between leading and managing. That clarifying element could be at the top of the list. To what degree do people understand the why, and do people recognize all those key points ultimately as it relates to what am I doing and how am I contributing? And if I'm contributing, how can I see what it is? The notion of being inspiring people day to day is what gets people excited. And the simple act of what you're talking about does make a difference. And surprising people, which I think is a great comment, is something everyone should think about. What do they least expect of me that could be inspiring to them or to a person that works for me? So that's very good. Which goes to the whole notion of communication. You know, one thing that inspires people, as far as I'm concerned, is the ability for people to know that you're listening. It's not what you're saying, it's not what you're doing sometimes, it's just what you're hearing. And the fact that you are actually listening enough to come at a later point to share back with someone, or that you've heard them enough that you're engaging them beyond the initial conversation, or maybe their ideas get generated into product or something that improves the business. And your ability to communicate, not just in this kind of setting if this was your team, but to facilitate effectively as well. Not as the head of the business, but as a person in the room is part of the conversation. And to recuse yourself from being the lead decision maker that everyone is looking for direction, but that are engaging everyone else in the conversation. And your ability to facilitate says a lot about your own maturity as a leader to separate where you need to lead and make decisions versus where you can lead from behind and encourage the right kind of action. And then lastly, on talent management, which is a 2-day program in and of itself, is one where I guess if each of you looked at yourself and you say, where am I best at in terms of hiring and growing and recognizing and doing all the fundamentals really well, really, if there were two areas that will make the difference, it's not only in the quality of the people that you hire and the process that you choose, but the mechanism you use to ensure that they know how they're doing. And it's not just the notion of giving feedback, but it's the notion of when you see the opportunity, you give feedback daily, you give feedback on an hourly basis, you have a sense for what's possible with them, and you use that to your advantage. Because people want to know where they stand, and they also want to know what's possible. And if you can bring that to the table in either an organized or an even informal way, you get enormous, really, impact and productivity, and ultimately culture, and ultimately the notion of, leading a great place. So these 4 areas I share with you because in many ways they touch upon all the things that I've experienced, and I think for everyone here there's relevance in some way, shape, or form. So thank you, everybody. Thanks.